Hello, and welcome to the Unsung Cyber Hero Adventures TV network. Today's show focuses on answering the question, assuming that cybersecurity is national security, how do we get our house in order? Stay tuned to find out. I'm your host, Gary Berman. Our mission is to shine the light on the people and organizations who keep us safe online while at work, home, and school, and to serve as a business-to-business networking platform for the cybersecurity and IT community. We've learned that 55% of human communications is nonverbal. That's why we include a video feed so that you have the option of seeing our guests or simply to just listen. That's also why we're called a TV network. We're all about information sharing and business-to-business networking. You never know who you're going to connect with and how you'll be able to maximize opportunities resulting from hearing from our guests. This is especially valuable right now that the community's primary way of conducting business, conferences, has been put on hold for the foreseeable future. We have an incredible panel of thought leaders on today's show. Sam Visner is the Director of National Cybersecurity FFRDC at MITRE and a board member at the Space ISAC. He's also a professor at Georgetown University, and he even worked at the NSA as well. Hi, Sam. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be with you and our distinguished guests.
Thank you so much. Lauren Zabrick is the Executive Director of the Cybersecurity Project at Harvard University's Belfor Center. She is a Recorded Future Alumni, a National Geospatial Intelligence Alumni, United States Air Force veteran, and former DoD civilian intelligence analyst with multiple deployments. Hi, Lauren. Glad you're here.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for having me on.
I already have a question for you. When do you sleep?
Basically around 10:30 till 6:30.
Okay, so you get a good night's sleep. Great. General Greg Touhill was the first CISO of the federal government and is currently the president of AppGate Federal Group. He's a board member of ISACA, serving on the Audit and Risk and Technology and Finance committees, and he serves on the Federal Advisory Board of Splunk. General Touhill, great to see you again.
Great to see you too, Gary, and thanks to the other panelists today. Looking forward to a great discussion.
Well, let's begin with you there. You know, what were some of the challenges that you faced as the first federal government CISO?
Well, you know, aside from not necessarily having any statutory authorities, you know, one of the big problems that we had was I thought we had some great policies in place, but we weren't executing them well. So you have to pick your battles wisely in Washington. And the one that I decided was most important was to try to harden up our privileged access management. Those folks who had the keys to the kingdom, the system administrators and the like, they weren't using multi-factor authentication. And frankly, across the federal government, we were just woefully slow in adopting multi-factor authentication. But what we did was, during my tenure, is we targeted to get the privileged access, the folks who had the keys to the kingdom, to use multi-factor authentication. And we made a jump in measured performance from about 32% up into the low 90s during my time there. Now, did they sustain that? I don't know. However, you got to pick your battles wisely, and that's the one that we saw where it was a risk-based approach, and we thought we would get the best return on.
So speaking of battles, Lauren, you've had an incredibly interesting career path thus far. Can you tell us your origin story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my career in the Air Force. I graduated from the University of New Hampshire in 2003. And then I left in 2008, and a couple years after that, I joined the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, where I was lucky enough to join the counterterrorism mission and actually got to deploy a couple of times, which was great. In 2015, my husband got a job up here in Boston, and so I had to unfortunately leave government. But what I thought would be kind of a devastating career move really turned out to be an incredible opportunity. I left government and I went to a cybersecurity startup, which was then a startup, Recorded Future, as one of the earlier employees there, and then got to build a significant piece of the public sector side of the business, and then actually was very fortunate to be a student at the Harvard Kennedy School. And then my then advisor, now boss, asked me, Eric Rosenbach asked me if I wanted to become the executive director of the cyber project at the Belfor Center. And I thought, what an amazing opportunity to work on policy issues related to cybersecurity in our country. And so I said yes, and it's been a really incredible opportunity.
And, what is the Belfer Center's cybersecurity, mission? How would you describe it?
So the Belfer Center itself is a think tank that looks at science and international affairs. And so within that, there's a number of projects ranging from cybersecurity to a project called Defending Digital Democracy to the future of diplomacy and managing the atom, a number of issues that really affect national security. And so the cyber portfolio is my project. It's also the China Cyber Policy Initiative and then Defending Digital Democracy. So we each look at different areas of the cybersecurity issue, from disinformation and election security to larger issues of cyber policy, whether internationally, say having to do with norms or collaboration, as well as domestically. And then the China Cyber Initiative looks at specific China issues.
Wow, that is, quite a portfolio of important, projects. So, thank you for what you do. Speaking of important projects, Sam, the work you're doing, with MITRE and the government is so critical. All the architecture work that you and your team provide, for the cybersecurity ecosystem is unbelievably important. Can you share with our audience a little bit more about that and what is your mission?
Sure. And since the theme of this, Gary, is cybersecurity is national security, I'm going to try and make a little bit of that connection right here, if that's okay. The work that my center does, which is the National Cybersecurity Federally Funded Research and Development Center managed by MITRE, is to try to improve the cybersecurity of the nation's business infrastructure and critical infrastructure. And we do that based on the assumption that the companies and enterprises that own and operate this country's business and infrastructure do not have unlimited resources. They're dealing with cybersecurity. They know that it's an issue of national security. They know that our business infrastructure is important to our national security, that our energy, our transportation, our communications, our financial services, our healthcare infrastructure is absolutely critical to national security. But they don't have unlimited resources, either in terms of the people they can devote to doing this job or the money that they can spend. And Gary, they have to stay in business, serve their customers, pay their employees, bill their customers, do research and development, product development, and stay in business and be healthy businesses. So the question is, what can be done to take the technologies and products that are available today and put them together in examples of doing it right, what we call reference architectures, such that those reference architectures can serve as examples that banks and hospitals and hotel companies and retail companies and healthcare firms and others can use to improve their own cybersecurity. And my own personal reason for doing this is because I think that we have to embrace really the broadest definition of national security and the national interest. And this is something that isn't original with me. Going back several presidential administrations to the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative, we said that the cybersecurity of our military is important to national security, of our government is important to our national security, of our critical infrastructure is important to our national security, of the companies in our defense industrial base, their cybersecurity is important to our national security, and critical manufacturing. And roll the tape forward to Presidential Policy Directive 21, it defined almost every sector of the nation's economy and infrastructure as important to our national security. and I built my career in national security, it seems that this is the next best place for me to be, particularly given the interest and importance of the challenge of making cybersecurity possible, for enterprises that take it seriously, but have many other things that they also have to take seriously. So that's what we're doing now.
Well, thank you and everyone at MITRE for doing that. And just to build on that, Greg, in your role as president of the federal practice of AppGate, you are, I'm sure, constantly interacting with folks from CISA and the Department of Homeland Security. And, from my understanding, there are about 16 different critical infrastructure, designations, some of which Sam just talked about. What do you see going on now with the federal government and protecting our national security?
Well, let's not forget that national security and national prosperity are intrinsically related. You can't have one without the other. And, the federal government doesn't really manufacture anything. It uses tools and capabilities that the public sector goes out, or the private sector rather, manufactures, creates, and the like. And working together as a team is something that I think is critically important for public and private sector partnerships, which we're seeing this administration, like the administrations before them, continue to employ. And we're seeing, when it comes to cybersecurity, we're seeing a continuation of information sharing mechanisms. And during COVID-19, we've seen some exceptional work being done by the folks at CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, as well as other sector-specific agencies around the government to share best practices, to collaborate on actions. I know that Chris Krebs, the director of CISA, was holding weekly calls with folks from the private sector just to share information and to collect information as well. And I found that to be very fruitful as the government was pivoting to support the states, the communities, and the businesses out there. So I congratulate Chris and the CISA team, as well as all the other folks in the federal government that are actually working extremely hard to provide citizen-facing services and to pivot from that in-garrison office-based employment to a work-from-home model within the government as well.
And Lauren, just to build on that, you are in the information sharing, ecosystem and business, as it were. That's in large part your mission. And one of the things that I've noticed is that, the bad folks who are cyber criminals share information quite freely. I've just learned recently that there's the equivalent of a Yelp kind of rating system. Are people delivering on expectations of criminal behavior or efficacy of hacks and things like that? What do the good folks need to do, in your opinion, to facilitate more information sharing? How is that going?
That's a great question. On one side of that, if we're looking at the concept of national security, I think our state and local, our private sector, nonprofit, our information sharing organizations, they're working hard to do that. And, we're looking at ways to make that better in our research. But also, from a, purely, personal standpoint or more of a human standpoint, there's a lot that we can do on that level to really help sort of raise the tide for everybody, in our daily lives. So what General Twohill was talking about before with, adding in multi-factor authentication, for instance, if we, more of us did that, or more of us, looked at password security and using stronger random passwords across all accounts, for instance. Those are just some examples. But really, having people be a lot more aware of the threat and very simple things that people can do. So, when we look at national security and, if we actually take a page from the DHS playbook, if you see something, say something, we're all responsible for our national security. And so we should all be taking those actions.
And is it the case that your team has an important white paper that's going to be coming out, in the near future?
So we are often doing writing. So we are working on a particular project right now that I mentioned, and that is to really look at the cyber threat intelligence domain and how we can sort of create a roadmap for the domestic side, state and local, private sector, nonprofit, et cetera, to get to more of a networked approach to share that information, as we were saying, and maybe coordinate different actions. So it's a long-term project that we are working on. Other papers that we're working on really have to have focus on things like rules of the road with Russia, for instance. Should there be? Why or why not? Collaboration with our European allies in AI, for instance. So a lot of different papers. We actually just released a paper on digital contact tracing and some of the implications there for state and local and tech companies as well.
Well, on our show, I've never had a scoop, so I would love to get a scoop for one of your white papers and help you amplify and spread the good word that you're doing.
Thank you.
Sam, so speaking of good works, you're all about architecture and creating frameworks and the like. What do you think about what Lauren just said? Pertaining to nation states such as Russia or China or Iran hacking into, let's say, our election system.
So that's a very good question, and it's one that it's probably overdue that we face. The truth is that cyberspace is becoming a very contested domain. Some countries look at cyberspace essentially as sovereign territory. For them, cybersecurity is not about safeguarding information. It's about the governance of human beings and ensuring that they behave in ways that the government, that the regime believes is acceptable, which is a very different conception than we have. Whether or not we adopt that conception, and I don't argue at all that we should, we need to recognize that other countries do. And they see cybersecurity as a domain that not only can be governed, but conceivably can be wrested from us, wrested from other countries. So there really is a question as to whether or not rules of the road, for example, would be a good idea, the development of cyber norms. And the way I would see it, without giving you a definitive answer, Gary, is this, and our other guests may have a different view. But as the stakes grow, until recently, cybersecurity problems could cause the loss of information. They could be embarrassing. They might be able to cause a loss of a lot of money. But until recently, we didn't see much evidence that they could actually damage an infrastructure and kill people. But the stakes are rising. And in cyberspace that's contested, if in fact we're going to head that off, we may need to find ways to establish rules of the road and to deter activity that we think is unacceptable. And that means we have to detect it. We have to be able to deter it. Otherwise, norms are useless if there's no way of essentially detecting their violation and deterring them and punishing them. So I think the time has come for us, perhaps it's a little overdue, for us to have that discussion. On the other hand, even as that discussion is taking place, there is the possibility of deterrence by denial, which says that while we're still figuring out how to detect what you're doing and how to deter what you're doing and to punish you for it, which is something that we as a country will have to decide from a policy perspective, that we can also improve the architecture of our systems such that it is less likely that they can be penetrated. It's less likely that information integrity can be undermined. It's less likely that ransomware can be launched successfully. And there have been ransomware attacks against hospitals and ransomware attacks now against a company that does clinical tests for vaccines, which I think is very serious. We can make it harder for that to succeed, even as in a policy perspective, we hold the national discussion about the defense of cyberspace as a national resource. So that's what I think it ought to be done right now.
And General Twohill, just to build on that, I mean, one of the unusual aspects of cyber war and even cyber war that becomes kinetic, you know, in different ways, and then having some kind of deterrent in an offensive manner is once you use an offensive cyber weapon, my understanding, which may be incorrect, is then, you know, the adversary has that and they can use it. Is that true?
Well, Gary, as a graduate of the War College, I'll give you the standard answer. It depends. However, as you take a look at the employment of offensive cyber tools, you know, I'll tell you that unlike what you see in a Tom Cruise movie, a lot of these tools that are used are just basically features that are built into products. You know, very rarely will we actually go and employ a 0-day or, you know, some of the things that are reported in the press. Basic blocking and tackling is one of the critical parts of cyber operations, both on offense and defense. And, you know, Rob Joyce, who previously served as the cyber coordinator in the National Security Council, pointed out in a video several years ago that when he was running our tailored access operations unit at NSA, that we find that offensive cyber operators are the ones who understand how things work better than the folks that are actually operating some of those systems and take advantage of them. But as we take a look at the employment of offensive activities in the cyber domain, we've got to be very careful to make sure that we understand what the effects are. They're more than just tactical. They're strategic effects as well. And like Sam, I believe that we need to have a very open conversation as far as what kind of society do we want to have in the cyber domain? What type of values do we subscribe to? How do we interact in the global community? And frankly, there's some countries out there, as Sam's hinted towards it, that view the cyber domain as something that they can measure and can control. And we literally are seeing some areas and some countries that are actually fragmenting the internet and calling out their IP domain as sovereign territory. That I don't think is going to be tenable with today's modern economies and the digital economies around the world. And I think as we take a look at the next 5 to 10 years, having a very credible cyber deterrent policy is one of the things that our nation needs to address. But we also need to continue to promote cyber norms and expectations of behavior, commerce, and security.
Yeah, and you know, if you think of this conversation in a global context, I understand recently China just launched its own GPS system, and I think there are now maybe 4 or 5 of these satellite systems, you know, around the world. And I also learned recently that some of these systems, maybe including GPS, ours, are hackable. You know, and that you might be able to change, you know, the coordinates, let's say, of, you know, a boat or an airplane or something. Is that true, Lauren? Do you know?
You know, I can't say definitively, but I would say anything that can be connected to the internet is likely hackable. You know, finding a way into that system, changing the code, you know, ostensibly that would be true.
You know, and I'll just throw this out to, you know, to all of you. So what do we do now to ensure that we have the safest election possible?
There are several things we could do, Gary. First, we need to be realistic about the complexity of the election ecosystem. It's voting machines, voting tabulation machines, election night reporting systems, voter registration systems, the e-poll books that record that, who's been where on election day, and of course the question of media and social media. There are approaches that can be taken to improving the security of all of this. The voting security guidelines, which have been put in place with the support of the Election Assistance Commission, the EAC, those guidelines can be employed and voting systems can be certified to conform to the VVSG. And I think to the extent possible, that's a process that should continue as much as possible. Voter registration systems are more varied and some are more modern. Others may be legacy systems that go back to spreadsheets and ledgers in town halls. My own team at MITRE has developed a set of security controls and a reference architecture to improve the cybersecurity of voter registration systems. That's something that can and should be done and should be adopted. And those recommendations are, like the VVSG recommendations, the voting security guidelines, those are available openly and can be employed. The question of detecting illicit information in social media is difficult, but tools are being developed. We've developed one called Squint. Others have done similar work that allow you to do a screenshot of something that you think may be illicit, get a quick analysis of it, and pass that back to local election officials. So for example, if somebody's putting out text messages that says, hey, COVID-19 has been spotted at the following polling places, so if you're over 65, go home and you can vote by mail. Well, that's clearly bogus information. It would suppress the vote. And finding something like that, detecting it and calling it to the attention of people on the ground who can do something about it, these are things that in fact can be done. And I think it's critical. You've asked an important question. Of all of our institutions, the one that reflects our values and our interests perhaps most closely, for which people have fought and died, is the right to vote and to vote in a free and fair election. So anything that can be done and everything that can be done to improve the cybersecurity of our election system ought to be done. And I will tell you, a number of people are working darn hard to make that happen. But I've just pointed out to two examples of things where the security controls and the recommendations are available now and people are trying to implement them across the country.
Well, it would be great if you can just send us, the links to what you've created so that we can help, amplify your mission.
I will do it. I will do it subsequent to this interview.
Great. So Lauren, maybe you can share with us a little bit about what it's like working in an academic institution, about an issue like national security and cybersecurity, and, do they kind of get it, for lack of a better way of saying it?
Yeah, I think they do. There's a lot of academics out there who absolutely get it. And then, there's a lot of students too and fellows who are really interested in these issues. One great thing I think about working in this sort of situation is that I can look at all kinds of issues across the landscape. So not only things like cyber offense and, policies behind that, and domestic cybersecurity and things behind that, but also, I have the freedom to look at other aspects. So we were just talking about election security, for instance. And, one area that, we probably don't really think about too often is, for instance, racism in cybersecurity. And so, we just held this event online on Twitter and LinkedIn called Share the Mic in Cyber, hashtag Share the Mic in Cyber, to really highlight voices that have been underrepresented. And we think it's really important. My partner in that, Camille Stewart, had written an article saying that systemic racism is a cybersecurity threat. And if we apply that to election security, for instance, the whole issue of disenfranchisement of different populations, closing down polling locations, for instance, or not understanding how different communities share information can be a real threat. And so, like I said, within an institution such as where I work at the Harvard Kennedy School and the Belfor Center, I'm very lucky to be able to look at all these different sorts of issues and how they actually interconnect with each other.
Yeah, no doubt. General Touhill, as we're wrapping up here, is there anything else that you'd like to add to amplify your mission?
Yeah, frankly, following on to Sam and Lauren's comments about election security, I think it's really important that we recognize that, we've got the hardware systems, we have the software systems, but we also have the wetware, the human beings. And we have a very, very savvy group of folks who are using digital means to attack the wetware and perceptions and ideas and the like. There's a rampant amount of misinformation out there. And I think that we'd all be well served by greater public awareness and education that they are, in fact, the center of gravity that is being attacked, the electorate themselves. And what are some of these bad actors trying to do? Well, the range of things that they're trying to do is, one, undermine those free and fair elections, the process itself, and bring doubt into, is this in fact a free and fair election? That's one group. The second group, and maybe some of the same folks are also using misinformation to shape perceptions of the electorate as to candidacies, the processes, parties, philosophies, platforms, and the like. Rampant misinformation is out there. So what do we do about that? Well, we need to educate the electorate that they are at risk, they are a target for some of these actors out there. And there's some countermeasures that they themselves can employ. One, and I recommend this to my mom who sits at home in matching recliners next to my dad back home in Pennsylvania. I said, go get your news from multiple sources. Don't get target stare on that one particular channel that's only going to give you one particular perspective. Go out there and do your homework. As somebody who's a citizen, citizens have a responsibility to gather information and make sure that it's formed, it's as you're using as many sources as possible. It's the same thing that at Carnegie Mellon, where I teach, I tell my students, if you come with a single reference, I'm going to send you back. I want you to make sure that you're looking at the whole spectrum and not just one stripe of the spectrum. So we as electorate, as members of the electorate, we need to do our homework. We need to understand that we are targets, and we need to be as hardened as our software and our hardware. Our wetware needs to be hardened as well.
Wow, what a terrific insight. Sam, any final thoughts?
Yes, I certainly agree with Gary. In the end, cyberspace is a domain of human activity. It's not just an electromagnetic domain. Our infrastructures don't just depend on cyberspace. Increasingly, they reside there. And human experience doesn't just depend on cyberspace. Increasingly, it resides there. And that means that the stakes are higher than they've ever been. But as General Touhill just pointed out, it also means that we have some responsibility for how we live in cyberspace, for improving the cybersecurity of the devices that we buy and that we manage in our homes and factories and schools and government agencies, and any place else that we operate. And also improving the diversity of information to which we expose ourselves so that we have the ability to get some correlation on what we hear as human beings. And that, by the way, is cybersecurity for, as General Twohill put it, the wetware. The work that Lauren and her team is doing, I think, with Eric Rosenbach at Harvard is absolutely key. The United States has been a leader since the Second World War in helping to define a safe and relatively stable international system. The next stage of safety and stability in that international system is going to have to be in cyberspace. And the question is, who will help set that standard? And if it isn't the United States, what kind of international system will we have, and how will it, and will it suit us, and will it suit a country with our values? Which I guess is my challenge for us, that we should in fact, consider a leadership role. And lastly, I guess what I would say is, if we get this right, Gary, the benefits are enormous. People tend to worry about security in cyberspace. Let's not forget how it enriches life. It has given us, it has given us a global financial system. It's given us global entertainment. It's given us global research and development. It's given us global trade. It's given us the ability to connect human beings and families and friends and colleagues, nationally and internationally. We don't want to lose that. We want to safeguard it, but we don't want to lose the benefit of what we've created, which I think is really terrific. It's why I teach at Georgetown, because I think that the young people with whom I interact, they're our future. And if they're any example of what our future will be, as we get through the current challenges, frankly, I think our future is bright.
Well, thanks for that optimistic assessment. I love it. And Lauren, you of course get credit for the title of today's episode, Cybersecurity is National Security. And I think the three of you have demonstrated that. You have some final thoughts?
I do. Yeah. As both General Twohill and Sam were saying, this is, even though the domain of the internet has really been around for a while, it is all on us to safeguard it, not only the information that we're consuming, but the systems that deliver that information as well. And this is a domain that can't be safeguarded solely by the government or the military. It's on everybody. And so we all need to be educated on this information, as well as, again, the systems that deliver that information, our devices, for instance. We need to know the threat. We need to know how to protect ourselves. And we need to know what's going on. As we were saying, the internet really provides so much promise. If we look at, for instance, emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, ton of promise, but also a lot of concern there too. And so again, aligning these technologies with our values is extremely important. And so, as I was saying, everyone has this responsibility to really safeguard it together, because no longer can we or should we depend on, again, the military or the government to really, come running over the hill to save us. And, there's an example I was thinking about. There's a commercial right now where, they're asking, oh, how excited are you about 5G? And I just think about all these people who really don't understand what's behind this debate on 5G or just the technology in general. And so, I look at, how we can increase this education across our country, at the youngest levels, for instance. So there's a lot that we really need to do, I think, in order to raise awareness, raise education, raise our resilience in this country.
And, just to build on that a little bit regarding disinformation, there was quite a bit of that regarding 5G, and it became kinetic, I believe, in Europe, where some folks were harming, infrastructure and stuff because they thought it caused COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right. It's harmful to, to understanding what's going on, but also to mitigating this pandemic, and really trying to, separate out those issues and understanding what needs to be done.
Well, I, for one, am leaving this time together with incredible gratitude to the three of you. Thanks so much to Lauren, Sam, and General Twohill, for this great interview. And optimism. I think that, the value system that you all three have alluded to is why America is the longest standing democracy. And I happen to think it's only going to get better. So to learn more, we'll have their contact information in the show notes. And if you would like to be a guest on our show, just send an email to Gary at cyberheroescomics.com. So thanks, everybody. We hope this helps.